Mixing up the time, I arrived 1 hour earlier at the restaurant for my daughter's engagement dinner. But suddenly I heard her conversation with my son-in-law about me. For a moment, I was paralyzed, but soon I crafted my trap. I mixed up the time and slipped into the private dining room an hour early, pausing behind a column while my daughter and her fiancé whispered about me as if I were a ledger to be erased. 10 days, forged signatures, my house, my name, my quiet life. You're watching Revenge Files. Subscribe for a new twist daily. That hour stretched like a tunnel. They mapped a fake refinance using my paid-off bungalow, a closing date I hadn't agreed to, and a plan to paint me confused if I resisted, and my hands, suddenly steady, opened voice memos and pressed record. I live in Columbus, Ohio, in a one-story bungalow on a maple-lined block off North Broadway. My name is Evelyn Hart, and I've spent 23 years nursing people back to strength at Riverside Methodist. I count pills, measure IV rates, chart small victories. I am not careless with time. I am not careless with anything. The restaurant was Rook and Rye on High Street, the kind of place that sets each fork with a ruler's precision. We'd booked their back room for Friday, June 14th at 6 o'clock. I arrived at 5. They were already there, backs to me, framed by the glow of tea lights and the reflection of downtown in the window. "I'll have the packet by Monday," he said. His voice had the weightless confidence of someone who's never been told no. 10 days is fine, my daughter said. She signs things at the doctor's office without reading. It won't be hard. A server in soft shoes glided past with glassware. I moved deeper into the shadow of a pillar. The table had place cards shaped like leaves. Mine read Mom, Host, except I hadn't asked to host. They spoke about my bank as if they owned it. They spoke about my house as if it belonged to them. They spoke about me as if I were already a problem they'd solved. I learned the fiancé's hidden side in those 40 minutes. He said he'd created an LLC named Hart Family Events to make it easier to run costs, and that the lender liked clean titles. He said clean like it meant empty. He said title like he'd already changed mine. But then the server returned with a tray and saw me. "Miss Hart," she smiled softly. "You're early." My daughter turned. Surprise shot across her face and then smoothed into something bright and practiced. "Mom," she said, and hugged me quickly. "You must have gotten the time mixed up." Maybe I did. Maybe I was exactly on time. I tucked my phone into my purse, the red recording bar still alive. My heart slowed. Nurses know how to breathe in a code. I looked at the man my daughter planned to marry. Colin wore a navy blazer and a grin that never touched his eyes. He kissed my cheek like a politician and said, "Tonight's about family." I smiled. "Then let's do family," I said. The words tasted like salt. Back home, after a dinner I barely tasted, I made tea and spread bills and statements across my kitchen table. I checked my credit. A soft inquiry from Midway Lending pinged me. I had never contacted Midway Lending. I called their number and asked very calmly whether someone had pulled my file. A woman named Michelle confirmed an application in progress for a home equity line of credit. She said my contact had been Colin Price, authorized representative. She read back a phone number I didn't recognize, and an email that was mine, misspelled by one letter. I asked her to note that I had not authorized any application, to freeze the file, and to email me a confirmation. I spelled my email twice. She said, "Done." One problem, the lender already had scanned copies of a driver's license and a utility bill. Mine. I scanned the room for any place from which those images could have come. My purse had not left my shoulder at dinner. My mailbox was locked. Then I remembered, 2 weeks prior, while I iced cookies at my counter, my daughter had asked to scan something on my printer. It had a feed tray. I stood so quickly my chair tipped. I pulled the printer app and checked recent scans. A PDF sat there, dated May 30th, id.utility.eh.pdf. My own jaw set as I tapped open. Driver's license, a water bill, clean and bright. I printed the log, slid it into a folder, and labeled it in block letters, June. The next morning I met a lawyer downtown, an elder law specialist named Kara, who wore low heels and listened more than she spoke. I put the phone on her desk and played the recording. We both stared at a fountain pen while my daughter's voice described me as sweet but tired, and then as easily overwhelmed. The pen's gold nib caught a stripe of sun. Kara said, "We do this without a sermon. Step 1, you freeze your credit. Step 2, you move liquid funds to a new account. Step 3, you revoke any powers of attorney and revoke any authority to act on your behalf. Step 4, document everything. Step 5, you decide what you want the end to look like." I told her I wanted my home. I wanted my name back. I wanted my daughter to see without me telling her what seeing costs. Kara slid a retainer agreement toward me. $30,200. It felt like buying a lock that fit a door I had always left ajar. I stopped at my credit union on Carl Road and opened a new checking account with a $200 minimum, then transferred the rest of my savings by cashier's check. I drove to all 3 bureaus' sites and placed freezes. I printed the confirmations. I called the Secretary of State and asked for instructions to challenge an unauthorized LLC filing that used my name. An email arrived within the hour with a link and a form called Statement of Denial. I completed it, printed it, and sent it certified. Except the restaurant contract still had me as host. The paper on my fridge claimed I had promised an open bar, a dessert cart, and a photo booth I never ordered. The minimum spend was $4,500. The deposit I had placed months earlier was $1,500. The balance was set to bill my card that Friday night. I dressed in scrubs and drove to Rook and Rye on my lunch break. I asked for the general manager. He was a square-shouldered man with the careful eyes of someone who has seen too many weekends go sideways. I set the contract and my driver's license on the bar, along with a letter Kara had drafted on good paper, stating that any changes to the banquet event order must carry my wet signature in person. "I need one additional change," I said. "Reassign host to the person actually making decisions." The GM rubbed his jaw. "That would be Colin Price," I said, and laid down his cell number and email, both lifted from the lender's confirmation. "He chooses the packages. He says he's paying. He can be host." The manager pinched the bridge of his nose. "We can do a substitution with both signatures." "Good," I said. I waited while he printed a revised order. I signed its narrow line. The GM texted Colin a link and a simple sentence, "Sign to confirm." 10 minutes later, the second signature popped in, sloppy and quick. The GM stapled the packet and slid it into a folder marked with our reservation date. Then I added the last hinge to the trap. "Call me before anyone adds anything," I said. "Even a candle, I want a phone call." He nodded. I handed over a photocopy of my license with no add-ons without call to this number written across it in Sharpie. He chuckled, noted, "At home that night, I made a list with boxes and dates. Friday, the dinner. Monday, Statement of Denial lands at the Secretary of State. Tuesday, Midway Lending's fraud department calls. Friday after, small claims filing if needed. Nurse Brain's love lines you can check off. It calms the hum. Except quiet never lasts long when people smell money. Wednesday, an email landed in my spam folder, a draft care agreement that would give my daughter authority to manage social and financial affairs if I appeared under stress. I read it 3 times. It had no chop of a court, no doctor's signature. It was an amateur trap disguised as concern. The footer bore the name of an online legal template site and an invoice for $39. I printed it and wrote across the top in red, "No medical basis." Then I made an appointment with my primary care doctor and asked for a short letter stating I was oriented, capable, and independent. He printed it on letterhead and signed it with a flourish. He added one sentence I hadn't expected. "Patient exhibits professional insight into medical and legal boundaries." I slid that letter behind the fake agreement like a shield. Friday smelled like rain. I put on a simple black dress and low heels, then tucked my nurse's badge into my purse like a talisman. I arrived on time, exactly 6 o'clock, hand on the cool brass handle of the private dining door. Laughter bubbled from inside. The room glowed. My family ringed the big table. My sister waved. My cousin lifted her phone. My daughter lifted her arms and pulled me close. "You look beautiful," she said. Her perfume was the same one I'd bought her at Christmas. "Thank you," I said. and tried to find the girl who'd curled on my lap during storms. She was there, she was also not. The first toast came with a clink. Colin thanked everyone, and the restaurant, and my future mother-in-law for hosting like a queen. The room clapped. I drank water and smiled because my teeth still belonged to me. Appetizers arrived, then a man with a camera and a ring light I had never approved. A waiter rolled in a cart with a tower of cupcakes. The GM's eyes flicked to me from the door. My phone buzzed. Manager, the text read. Add-ons requested, photo booth and top shelf bar. Approve? I typed, no. See contract, and met his eyes. He dipped his chin like a man who appreciates a signed page more than a smile. But then Colin stood, phone in hand, and said, Quick change, everyone, open bar! The room cheered. He leaned to kiss my cheek again. My treat, Evelyn, he said, loud enough for the table to hear. Just enjoy. I set my glass down. I walked to the manager and asked for the packet. He invited me into the hall where the light dimmed and the music softened. I opened to the signature page with my underlined Sharpie rule. I showed it to him and pointed at the bolded words host, Colin Price. Charge his card, I said quietly. He nodded, almost relieved. Already done, he said. Authorization required a host card on file. When I returned to the table, the cupcakes sparkled with candles that spelled love. A photo booth backdrop had been unfurled in the corner with a glittery curtain and props. The camera guy panned, then stepped back as the manager approached Colin with a handheld terminal. Tonight's add-on, the manager said, voice courteous. We'll just get your signature. Colin's grin faltered. It's covered by the host, he said, even while staring at his own name printed under host. It is, the manager replied, turning the screen so anyone could read it. That's you. My daughter's smile became a tight ribbon. What's going on? She asked, but her fingers were already worrying the base of her wineglass. Colin dug for his wallet. He produced a card, then another. The terminal blinked twice and sang a soft error tone that carries the same finality as a pulse that doesn't return. The room watched in an uncomfortable silence that a violinist in the main dining room couldn't quite cover. Except I didn't want humiliation. I wanted truth. I lifted my water and said, calm enough to cut butter, would you help me with a toast? Everyone turned toward me, forks stilled. The camera's red eye blinked once and went dark. To timing, I said. To being early when it matters more than being perfect. My hand didn't tremble. To hearing people we love clearly, even when we wish we hadn't. My daughter's eyes searched mine. Mom, she whispered, but I set the glass down and opened my purse, and the red voice memo line looked like a tiny horizon before sunrise. We're not doing this, she said under her breath. Her voice had the tremor of someone who isn't sure which bridge she's standing on. We already did, I said softly, and tapped play. The room hummed with the white noise of a restaurant and two voices threading through it. Hers, describing me, his, plotting timelines. I let it run 15 seconds. The GM, who had drifted just inside the door, retreated like a man who'd walked into the middle of a weather system not listed on any forecast. I stopped the recording. Tonight will be paid by the host, I said, not loud, just clear, and everything else, we'll handle where people listen. Colin laughed, a sound with no air in it. You recorded us? He said, as if the recording were worse than the plan. That's illegal. Not in Ohio, I said. One-party consent? The table twisted with whispers. My cousin put down her phone. My daughter's face went pale, then hot. She stood. You hacked my account, she said. Then quieter, that agreement was because you've seemed so stressed. I set the doctor's letter on the table between the salad forks. I slid it toward her. Oriented. Capable. Independent, I read, because sometimes syllables have to wear their uniforms in public. She stared at the letter as if it were written in a language she had forgotten. Colin turned on charm like a faucet. We got carried away, he said, palms open. It was for the wedding. We wanted it perfect. We wanted to take the pressure off you. The pressure, I said, is a forged application and a shell company with my name. I took out the statement of denial receipt and the email from the lender freezing the file. Then, because I'm not a fan of fireworks indoors, I tucked them back. He leaned across the linen. You won't ruin this for her, he said, voice low. I won't ruin anything, I said. but I will document. The manager coughed gently and held the terminal out again. Colin's jaw flexed. He signed. Dinner went forward on small talk and knives hitting china and a silence between my daughter and me that felt like we were both writing on the same paper with opposite hands. After dessert, I kissed my aunt's cheek and thanked the staff. I signed my portion for what I had actually ordered months ago and left the rest to the host. Outside, the air smelled like wet pavement and cut limes. I didn't wait by the door. I drove home to my cedar porch and sat among wind chimes and the low hum of the city and made a call to the Ohio Attorney General's Consumer Protection Section. I reported identity theft and unfair business practices. They gave me a case number and a quiet assurance that letters would go out. Monday, a letter by certified mail reached the Secretary of State. Tuesday, Midway Lending's fraud investigator called to confirm the hold and requested an affidavit, which Kara had already drafted. I signed it in front of a notary at the UPS store on Indianola. Wednesday, the Attorney General's office sent a mediation request to Collins LLC and to my daughter, with a copy of the audio transcript pages Kara had excerpted. Except Trouble hates paper that arrives with signatures. By Friday, Collins' tone changed. He sent me a text with the kind of apologies that use a lot of words without saying sorry. Misunderstanding, overzealous, we can fix this. Then a second text offering to settle privately to avoid embarrassment. He proposed $1,000 for your trouble. I took a photo of my kettle, whistling, because that's what zero gratitude looks like. Kara smiled when I showed her the messages. Small claims, she said. Your real damages are under 6. We file for the maximum, $6,000, because the dinner add-ons, the time, the credit freeze costs, the retainer portion specific to this work, and the emotional distress claimable in Ohio's small claims under general damages can support it. We'll want a judge who respects a clean file. I filed at Franklin County Municipal Court on a humid Thursday. The clerk stamped the date, July 18th. I paid the filing fee and scheduled service. A process server with work boots and kind eyes took the packet, including the audio transcript, the restaurant contract with host Colin Price, the statement of denial receipt, and the lender's freeze confirmation. He said, "You sure you want to serve him at work or home?" "Whichever keeps my daughter from having to witness it," I said. He nodded as if that bit mattered more than everything else. But then the mid-roll surge I hadn't planned hit like a summer storm. My daughter knocked on my door that night. She brought in her suitcase and a grocery bag with 2 sweaters peeking out like embarrassed cats. Her mascara had bled a little, a detail she would hate me to remember. She sat at my table and wrapped both hands around a mug. "I saw his messages to his friend," she said, voice flat from crying. "He called you the old cash machine. He said if I couldn't be strategic, he'd replace me by fall with someone less sentimental." She slid her phone across. The screen showed a thread with a green bubble that was not careful. I read them all. My stomach did not drop, it hardened. Love wants to drop. Experience knows better. I moved the salt shaker and set my palm face up on the table so she'd have to choose to place her hand in mine. She did. It was warmer than mine. She stayed 2 nights, not because I asked, but because her key fit here. The hearing date arrived with a clear sky that felt rude. Courtroom 12B was beige and humming with the quiet chaos of people who'd rather be anywhere else. I wore a navy dress and flats. Kara sat beside me with a thin binder whose tabs looked like a careful person's teeth. Colin arrived in a gray suit a shade lighter than his face. He did not look at me. He looked at the judge, a woman whose calm could snuff a fire from across a field. When our case was called, I stood and told a story that used verbs more than adjectives. I said I had placed a deposit for a dinner. I said I had never authorized add-ons. I presented the signed banquet event order showing host Colin Price and my Sharpie clause requiring a call before any changes. I submitted the manager's sworn statement that he had called me and that Colin had approved add-ons and provided his card. I handed over the audio transcript the Attorney General had already reviewed and the lender's email confirming a fraudulent application opened in my name. "I don't need to hear the audio," the judge said, and then to the clerk, "Note that both parties stipulate to the existence of the recording and to its authenticity." Colin's lawyer tried for a smile. My client and his fiancé were planning a celebration, he said, spreading his hands. This is, at most, a contract misunderstanding. The small claims form isn't for family disputes. The judge lifted a page. This isn't a family dispute, she said. This is a contract with clear terms and a separate documented attempt to open a financial account without authorization. She looked at me. Ms. Hart, your damages? $1,500 for the initial deposit portion reallocated from my spending to time spent untangling, Kara said, calm as rain. $1,275 for counsel time specific to the fraud processes at our reduced small claims rate. $75 in notary and certified mail costs. $200 in transportation and filing fees. $2,950 in fraudulent add-ons attempted to be shifted to Ms. Hart but charged to Mr. Price. We ask for $6,000 inclusive as the court's maximum, and a written finding that the Hart Family Events LLC used Ms. Hart's name without consent. The judge leaned back. Mr. Price? His lawyer glanced at him, then shrugged with only his eyebrows. We'd offer $1,000 as a peace gesture, he said. The judge wrote something with a fountain pen. Judgment for the plaintiff, in the amount of $6,000 plus court costs, she said, as if reading a weather report. Finding the defendant attempted to shift contractual obligations in bad faith and submitted or caused to be submitted a financial application in the plaintiff's name without authorization. The court orders removal of the plaintiff's name from any entity managed or created by the defendant within 30 days and directs the clerk to forward the order to the Secretary of State. Silence settled like dust after a shelf falls. Colin stared at the carpet as if threads would give him a way out. They didn't. After court, I walked a block in the sun and bought a lemonade I didn't need. I sat on a bench and let my shoulders drop. My phone buzzed with a call from the Attorney General's office. They had secured an assurance of voluntary compliance from Collins LLC, no use of my name, a $2,500 civil penalty suspended so long as he complied, and a written apology addressed to me filed in their records. They would send me a copy. When I got home, a letter lay waiting from Midway Lending, confirming the file closed, the application void for fraud, and a notation never to accept any application regarding my address without in-person verification by me with 2 forms of ID. Sometimes bureaucracy makes a sound like a door bolting. Except revenge without repair is just a sharper pain. My daughter and I sat on the porch steps that evening with our backs to the rail, watching foot traffic and sky. She had ended the engagement by text earlier, then in person, then with a final email that used the word boundaries where love had used forever. I did not say I told you. I did not say anything at all for a while. She said, I called you tired. You saw me tired, I said. That's not the same as weak. We replaced my mailbox lock the next day and labeled a folder with her name. Into it went copies of my freezes so she'd know how to do it if she ever needed. Into it went a list: bank, credit union, utilities, any place someone can pretend to be you. I taught her how to ask for a supervisor in a calm voice and what to write on the top of every page: date, time, name, because paper that breathes is louder than a cry. Colin tried once more by email to posture. He cited love and youth and misjudgments in the rush of planning. He hinted I'd regret dragging private matters into court. I forwarded it to Kara, who replied on firm letterhead that any future contact must go through counsel and that non-compliance with the court's order would result in a contempt motion. Then I archived him, which is an underappreciated word for opening a drawer and closing it again. By August, the check cleared. The clerk's receipt arrived, with its dull stamp. The Secretary of State's website showed Hart Family Events amended to remove my name. The Attorney General's letter went into my June folder, then into a box on the top shelf of my hall closet. I slid the box in place and exhaled. In September, my daughter and I returned to Rook and Rye on a quiet Tuesday. The manager recognized us and pretended he didn't. We ordered 2 salads and split a dessert, a habit from when money was thin and laughter was sunlight. We left a tip that made our server grin and stood on High Street under a sky that looked like a clean page. She asked, "Do you ever wish you hadn't heard it?" "Sometimes," I said, "because truth needs no frosting. But mixing up the time saved us months of pretending." I touched her shoulder lightly. "Now you get to pick men who don't narrate life like a budget sheet." She laughed, a real sound that snapped a thread I'd been pulling at absent-mindedly since June. We walked to the car. Leaves had started to turn. My bungalow glowed when we arrived, a small house with a steady heart. I set fresh late summer flowers on my kitchen table and took down the June folder to file one last thing, the final notice from the court that the judgment had been satisfied. I clicked a pen, wrote the date, put the page in its plastic sleeve, and slid it in. Then I sealed the box. I reached up, returned it to the shelf, and stood a moment with my palm flat against the cardboard, as if it were a door I'd just locked. Time used to be my enemy. I thought I didn't have enough of it, that I had to rush, sign fast, keep up. Now I show up early for what matters and late for nothing. And when I hear whispers, I press record in my head and choose the room I want to stand in.